May 7th, my daughter was born, my first daughter. I was a father, and I had made a promise that I would never leave her like my father left me. And May 21st, I was being sentenced to prison.
Oh my gosh.
So you can imagine what my thoughts were as I was being led back to the holding cell. And the judge said to me, "You're a menace to society. You belong in prison."
Hello and welcome back to the Rock Bottom Podcast. My guest today is Antong Lucky. He was a convicted gang member of the Dallas Bloods gang. He transformed his life to become an advocate for nonviolence and now works to bring communities together. There are so many interesting ideas in this episode. Antong talks about how elements of his childhood made joining a gang seem like the only option, and some of his natural talents led him to become the leader of the Dallas Bloods gang. And once he was able to direct those talents towards a more positive outcome, he found a lot of success. Once Antong is in prison, he talks about how he is still viewed as a leader even within the prison. And so it brings up ideas of what rehabilitation looks like, what role does incarceration play in that, and how those two can be improved. It brings up the idea of positive leadership. I think he, in that era with mentorship, started to really understand the power he had to affect positive change in his community as a leader. He really started to come into his own to direct people towards a outcome that was less violent and more building of a community. So it was a really interesting and fascinating conversation that expresses a bunch of different ideas. I hope you get a lot out of it. I'm here with Antong Lucky, a activist, author, and president and CEO of Urban Specialists, which is an organization dedicated to disrupting violence in urban communities. He's the author of the memoir, A Redemptive Path Forward, My Life from Incarceration to a Life of Activism. Antong, welcome to Rock Bottom. Thank you so much for being here.
Man, it's my pleasure being here. Thank you for inviting me.
It's great to have you. You have such a fascinating story full of profound transformation. I'm sure our audience is really going to get a lot of value out of it. I'd love to start at the beginning. How did your story begin?
My story started in East Dallas Frazier Court Housing Project. My mom, 16-year-old mom, met my dad, fell in love, and then 9 months later, after I was born, my dad was arrested and sent to prison for 50 years. And my mom dropped out of school, went to work to provide for her new baby of blessing that she had just had. And the interesting part about it is that I look back in hindsight, my mom closed the door on that chapter of love because she had to just go to work and et cetera, et cetera.
Mm.
Whether that was a good idea or not, I don't know. But I understand the implication that it had on me because growing up as a kid, I always yearned for my father. I always wanted to know who he was. And my mother, because she was thrust into work and providing at such a young age, she had no time to explain that stuff to me.
Mm.
So much so that nobody did. Nobody in my family really had a conversation with me about my father. Because my father ultimately did 37 years, 37 calendar years out of my life. So I grew up my entire life until I was 37 without a father and
Wow.
without understanding who he was and et cetera, et cetera. Right? And so as a kid, I vividly remember like those feelings that I had. just not understanding who I was, not having a man to show me things that a father should show his child. And those questions permeated my being. I was obsessed with wanting to know who my father was, but I also felt embarrassed to even ask. So as a kid, I wanted to ask that question, but I felt dumb. Like I felt like, who asks who his father is? That's some stuff that you should inherently know, or
Wow.
someone should inherently tell you. But I never forget those feelings because I was so obsessed with that. But I was obsessed with it in silence, in silo, because I never talked to nobody about those feelings. I never had the courage to even just speak what I felt as a child. And so for
That's so
me,
much to carry inside
yeah,
of you as a young child.
exactly, it was just like a lot. I just remember as a kid feeling like too ashamed to ask those questions, right? And so what I did, because my mother worked long hours, you know, I applied everything I had in school. Like I was thriving in school. Like I was a kid that brought the teacher the apple. I was a kid that the teacher say, Antong is my favorite. He's the favorite. And I remember being in talented and gifted program that they had when we was kids, and I remember conversations around moving me up. They was talking to the school was talking to my mother about, hey, we got to move him up. Like he is killing these grades. He's this work is boring him. Like we need to skip him up 2 grades. And for the life of me, I don't know why my mother never did that. She was so opposed to me. I just thought I thought that would be so cool. Like, Richard was supposed to be in the 6th grade, but I'm in the 8th grade with 8th graders. But my mother, for some reason, didn't didn't grant that move. Right? I'm very smart in school, very talented, and I was a little kid, and I was skinny, and I had a big head. Like my head was disproportionate to my body. I remember,
Carrying all that juicy brain that's making you good at
yeah,
school.
yeah, yeah. My cousins used to say they used to call me Blimpy, Blimpy, like the Goodyear blimp. You remember the Goodyear, the blimp?
Yeah,
They used to
yeah.
call me Blimpy,
So
right?
top heavy.
Yeah, and so my grandparents, like they were my primary caretakers. Like my grandma, they was homeowners. My grandfather worked for the city of Dallas, et cetera, et cetera. They were very stable, principals, morals, all that good stuff. And I remember my grandparents saying, uh, "Grandbaby, you got a big head because you got a big brain, and you're gonna be a leader one of these days. You're gonna be a leader." And somehow that made me feel good. I mean, I really believed them, even though they were just telling me that. But that helped shield me from the ridicule that I used to get from my cousin for being skinny with
Mm.
a big head.
It
And
sounds
so,
like it became part of your self identity.
yes, it did. So, because I used to hide with my other cousins, which was totally a contrast to me. My other cousins, they were just like they was ruthless. They had no heart. They were just ruthless as kids. Bullies, all that good stuff. And so I used to try to hide my intelligence around my cousins just to blend in with them. I remember doing that as a kid. I remember like I didn't want my grandparents or my mother letting them know what my grades were because I would bring home all A's and probably one B sometimes. And they would discuss me amongst the other kids, and they didn't understand what they were doing when they were discussing me amongst other kids. They was making me be the envy in everybody eye, right? And I knew I was my grandparents' favorite because I got a lot of cousins, a lot of cousins. My grandparents had a lot of grandkids, and when we'd all go to our grandmother's house, I was the only one that was allowed to sleep in the bed with my grandmother, and all my cousins slept in the back. So that's how I knew I was the special one.
Your teacher's favorite, grandma's favorite. It sounds
Yeah,
like
yeah,
really creating a
yeah,
positive situation for yourself.
yeah. But it came with its challenges because my cousin, But anyway, so my cousin them, they was very mischievous as young people. They was very into a lot of stuff, and they began busing us to a school that was outside our neighborhood, probably about 3 miles outside our neighborhood, not that far. And when I remember going to this school, the elementary school, the kids that we met, that was my peers, it's like they was just a little bit tougher and rougher, and life was different from them. Like these kids were just mean. I mean, these
Mm-hmm.
kids were just mean. We would have to fight these kids every day, and I didn't understand it as a kid. And I didn't have nobody to talk to about it. And I grew up in a neighborhood where survival was the name of the game. It was about who the toughest. It wasn't about education. It was about smart kids get bullied. And you saw that every day, and it was reinforced every day. And so that's the environment I grew up in. And then going to a school, expecting to meet new friends and all that good stuff, what kids do. We these kids are mad, and we fighting these kids, and these kids are, you know, have identified with like gangs. They are gang. They wear a certain color and all that stuff. And then every day, like, because we were getting bused from our neighborhood to that school, the school bells to let out is at 4 o'clock. If you had a class on the other side of the school, when the school bell rings and end, if you're not at that bus at 4:02, it probably take you 3 minutes to get to the bus. But at 4:02, that bus is taking off. And I remember, like, as a kid saying, "Who made this up? Why do they do this?" And if you miss the bus and you're in a neighborhood from another neighborhood, that automatically meant you're gonna have to fight the kids in front of the school. So every day for me at that new school, my safety depended
Because
on,
the kids from a different neighborhood were kind of like picked on in that way.
oh yeah, yeah. If you miss that bus, you are most certainly gonna have a fight. You got to fight these kids, and I never understood that as a kid. I was like, this is so cool. And so every day when I missed the bus, my safety depends on how fast I can run or who I could fight. And that became every day for me. Like, cause you got 10 kids waiting on you. You better have some jet fuels, and cause we had to run back to the neighborhood. And I remember dealing with that. And I remember dealing with that so much so that my empathy and understanding, even as a kid, started eroding. Right. I
Hmm.
remember, like, when my grades started slipping because I could no longer focus on education. I had to start focusing on survival. I had to focus on making sure I didn't get stumped to death and all this good stuff. And so that stuff became like an everyday part of my life, and to the point, because my neighborhood did at this time didn't have a gang identity. We were just our
Hmm.
neighborhood. We were just a bunch of friends, a bunch of kids who loved each other, grew up with each other. And these other neighborhoods that surrounded my neighborhood, not more than a mile away from each way. So, but it was so segregated, and these kids that identified with gangs, and so they would fight. We would fight them every day. Every day we would fight these kids, and it
It's
escalated to,
already I'm hearing this tragic turn from, a bright kid that loves school and loves teachers to kind of being
right.
in this new school where the environment is a little less safe. And then all of a sudden it kind of becomes less about, this like expression
Right.
of your joy and intelligence, and more about a fight for like survival,
Right.
almost literally.
And that's exactly how I would describe it, because that's what it became for me. And I can remember when my grades started dropping. Um, I can remember, like, when school started being secondary to a lot of other stuff, right? When it was always primary for me, and my empathy started eroding. So I started realizing that I had to become what the neighborhood said I had to become if I wanted to live, if I wanted to survive. I had to be that. There was no way that I could hide, um, and be this good kid. I got to be what surrounded me. And so, um, if you walk out your house and you see 10 guys in a red sweater stomping a guy in a blue sweater, your deductive reasoning is gonna say, "Go put on a red sweater," and now you're in the game. And so, that's kind of how my life unfolded. Uh, these guys was constantly harassing our neighborhood, and at some point, me and a couple of my cousins when I had got away from that, trying to be the good kid that I wanted to be, we started the first blood game in Dallas, and that when my life sped out in front of me, and I was running trying to catch up because
Well,
I felt myself living this duality that I think most kids live in urban communities where they want to do right, they want to be good kids, they want to tap into their genius, they want to go to college, but an environment that says you have to be strong, you have to be tough, and that if you're smart and educated, that means you're weak. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs kick in, safety and survival and
right.
all that good stuff. So you cannot self-actualize when you're worried about your safety and all that good stuff. And so that's why
And
I
what
started.
age? What age were you at this
This is
point?
probably about 12, 13 years old, around 12 and 13. And I remember like thinking, even as a kid, I think because of my father left me and it forced me to have these thoughts and obsession with these thoughts. I think it grew me up quicker than what I can enjoy as a kid. And so I would be thinking about the situation like, why is this like this? I was questioning way back then, but I wasn't. I had no one to ask these questions to. It was just like a conversation with myself that I always had. Like, what is going on? Why is this stuff is constantly happening like this? Who is making this happen like this? Somebody got to know that I'm here saying I need help, but that help never came.
Yeah.
And so one thing led to another. Ned. Uh, I began, and because you can only play so long, you can only hide for so long, I began seeing myself going down the wrong path, getting into a lot of stuff as a juvenile, and doing a lot of stuff that I didn't want to do, but I felt like I had to do. Uh, and I was so conscious of it. It wasn't like I was doing this stuff and not thinking. I was
Hmm.
conscious of how far I was going down this part of the life graph, the negative part. I saw that, and I didn't have no way of stopping it. I had no way of, in my mind, I probably could, but in my mind then, I said there wasn't no way to stop this. I'm going down this deal like
And
I'm
the pressure kind of came from the other kids and just kind of
oh
the
yeah,
general group dynamics and the
it was group
yeah.
dynamic. This is what everybody was doing, and so I couldn't stop it. And unfortunately, um, at the age of 19, I was standing in front of a judge, and it's a lot that happened in between that time, from 12 to 19. A lot of stuff that I witnessed and I went through, a lot of trauma. But I remember standing in the courtroom, felony court, and I was very much expecting to go home to my family after this trial. And the judge said to me, "You're a menace to society. You belong in prison." And it was my first case, and my first case as an adult. I thought I'd go home. And I remember sitting there, and in my head, because it was in slow motion, in my head, I was saying, "But Judge, you don't understand. Like, I'm from East Dallas. You got to be tough. You got to be the survival of the fittest. Like, that's not who I am. It's just the armor that I put on to protect the little kid in me." And those words never came out of my mouth. As I turned around and looked at my mother, and I seen the disappointment in her face because I'm her oldest child. And she had a look of, I failed. I never forget that look. And
Hmm.
they led me back to the holding cell. It's like my life was flashed before me. Like here I am. All my life I wanted to dodge going to prison because my father went to prison, and I knew the implication and the impact that it had on my life. May 7th, May 7th, my daughter was born, my first daughter. I was a father, and I had made a promise that I would never leave her like my father left me. And May 21st, I was being sentenced to prison.
Oh my gosh.
So you can imagine what my thoughts were as I was being led back to the holding cell. I felt
Right.
like
It's
I felt
like
like
exactly what you promised to yourself wouldn't happen.
felt like I failed. I felt like I struck out in the game of life, and I was wondering to myself. And I became very introspective in that moment. That's what I can say when I got sentenced. I became very introspective. I started looking within to say how this happened. I wanted to know, like, how did I go from an A on the road talent gifted student who loved education, who had morals and values, to a judge saying I was a menace to society? And I wanted the answer to that question. And so as they led me back to the holdover, amongst shock, amongst fear, amongst uncertainty, I wanted to know, like, how did this happen? How did I get to this point? How did my life get so far out of hand that, that I've been called a menace to society, and I'm on my way to prison, leaving my precious daughter behind. I went into prison with that on my mind. That was uh, occupying my mind. And as I
It's such
began,
a painful label to hear, especially when you kind of have that awareness that a lot of the things that have led to that point are situational and not like part
right,
of your identity. Your identity is like I'm a good kid that like wants to,
yes,
make grandma and teachers happy.
yes. And I never envisioned as a kid that I would be in that position. I never saw that coming because I knew I was smarter than that. Um, I knew that at least I thought that I could navigate and maneuver the challenges that growing up in my neighborhood presented me. I thought I was smart enough to maneuver it and not get drawn in by it. And here I am being sentenced to prison. So I felt that landed a blow, a tough blow to me, to my being, because I knew intuitively that I wasn't what he had labeled me. I knew intuitively that I had a lot of good in me, but I did accept and was accountable to what he said in terms of his sentence. I was accountable to that. I didn't spend a lot of time lamenting about the fact I wanted to figure out what led me here. How do I deal with that so that I don't come back, so that I make the best of this situation. So you got to imagine. So now I'm going into prison as the founder of the first ever blood gang in Texas. I'm going into prison like that, which poses a lot of challenges, because you're the leader in a um, 50-1 game where 50 is the other and one is you. That puts you at risk. And so I went in like that. So I had that looming over my head that I was thinking about. Then I also had my daughter, who I had just left, who I only spent 2 weeks with her, and then now I'm separated. And I couldn't help but to think about all of the stuff that I felt from 0 to 19 as a kid growing up without his father. And I knew how painful that was and how challenging that would be for my daughter uh, if I don't make it out of this situation. I understood the dangers of prison. You get killed in prison. So I understand all that. I had all this stuff going in the prison. But one thing was sure for me was that because I was at that rock bottom. For me, that was my rock bottom because I
Hmm.
felt like I was better than that. And so, at least from my perspective, I had this wicked way of saying, this is going to be my rise. This is going to be my phoenix. I don't know how it's going to happen. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but this is going to be the beginning of something different for me, which was uh, which was different from many other men who was in prison who was expecting me to be that character that I was prior to prison. So you got to
Oh.
understand, going into prison, these guys, when I came in, they were saying, yeah, they was cheering because they saying our leader is here. But at the same time, their leader, as they called me, was really contemplating his life. He was really looking into that stainless steel mirror and confronting everything from his childhood that led him up to this point. And so I'm dealing with that. So this is what I go into prison dealing with.
So,
Really being truthful with myself, owning my flaws, being accountable to my actions, and then trying to figure out how do I use this situation to recreate myself into something different.
do you think the birth of your daughter being so close to it kind of contributed to that mindset shift, or was it something else entirely?
It was definitely that. That was the catalyst. You know, my daughter was. I was so preoccupied thinking about my daughter and just comparing her, what I felt her feelings would be comparable to my feelings when my father was not
Yeah,
around,
of course, of course.
and I wouldn't wish that on
And,
him.
and what was the sentence, just for the context? Like,
He gave
how
me.
much time were you looking at?
I was facing 5 to 99 years, but he gave me 7 years, which I'm thankful for that. He had the range from 5 to 99 to life, but he gave me 7 years. I was thankful for that, but again, 7 years was a long time for me. So one day, incarcerated is a lot of time.
Hmm.
I went in like that. But the interesting thing that happened to me, because I don't want to make it sound real sad, the interesting thing that happened to me that I always get credit to when I went in, I met a mentor.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
So one day, I'm coming out the chow hall, trying to get acclimated with prison, which I really just couldn't. Just felt like I didn't belong there, and but I only held that to myself. And this guy saw me coming out the chow hall one day, older guy. He's probably about 15 years old, 15, 16 years older than me. I was 19 at the time. And he approached me. Uh, and I was kind of leery when he approached me because I didn't know, prison, you got to be prepared for that kind of stuff. And he asked me, these was his exact words that he said to me. He said, "Little brother, you Antong Lucky." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Man, this whole unit of men is talking about you. They fall out of place. They are praising you like you some god or something. They fall out of place. They do anything you ask them to do that." And he said, "Brother," and at that point, I hadn't noticed none of that. I was
Hmm.
trying to navigate and maneuver. I hadn't noticed it. And he said, "Listen to me, little brother." He said, "Listen, if you have the ability to lead these dudes to do wrong," he said, "within
Hmm.
you is the same ability to lead these guys to do right." He said, "You're a
Wow.
leader." And when he said that, right, I was taken aback by it, and it resonated. The first thing I thought about was when my grandparents said that to me when I was a
Hmm.
kid, and my cousin was making fun of my big head, and he said, "You're a leader," and it resonated. And so that caught my attention because normally I probably would have brushed that off, but that caught my attention. And so that brother Willie Ray Fleming begins to mentor me in prison. He said, "You're a leader," and so he started giving me these books to read. He would make me read these books 4 or 5 times before we discuss them, and we would talk and we would have deep conversations about life, about my family, about my kids, and so before long, I think I was a Willie clone. I was a Willie clone because all you saw me doing was reading. Because once he opened up my mind back to that educational, bug that I had as a kid,
Hmm.
it's almost like he gave me the keys to the gates in prison because it freed me. Because I started reading so much and studying so much that the librarian, who was not a state employee, we became good friends. I mean, we would have conversations about everything. And so much so that like whenever some big church donated new books to the prison, she would call me out first and allow me to pick through the books before
Hmm.
anybody else. That's how much I was reading, and I just found myself like spending an enormous amount of my time just reading and studying. And I'm talking about philosophy. I'm reading comparative religion. I'm just reading everything, and I was just so fascinated because I was like, it freed my mind and it opened me up to a world that I probably would have never known existed had I not started reading, because I started reading these stories and I was having these mental experiences like I was there. And of course, when you start taking in that information come out. And so I
Mhm.
found myself teaching a lot of men. Um,
It also sounds like whereas previously it was a lot about the situation, like changing what you felt like you had to do, and this is a time when it connection with this mentor where you kind of realizing your own like power to affect positive change in the situation, in the world, and kind of shaping the situation to like become the world that you want to see. And that I think
exactly.
that's a very powerful like mindset shift that seems to be like a then has
Man,
continued.
so much so, Ned, that I denounced and separate ties from the gangs while I was in prison. And that's something you just don't do when you're in prison, because the gangs provide the protection. And
Right.
so I was so convicted in this new headspace and this new mindset that I was having, that I was willing to accept whatever consequence came with me denouncing the gang. That's how convicted I was, because it's like I saw a light bulb came on me and it was so bright that I just wanted that light to shine, and I wanted to spread it to everybody else that I came in contact with, and so I became that person. I became so studious that at 19, 20 years old, I had grown men who were like 30 and 40 who started seeking me out for advice, and I found myself having these conversations with men about the stuff that normally don't get talked about in the prison. About being accountable, about your kids out there, about finding out why you here, that good stuff. And I think my example was so powerful and so strong that the gangs, my rivals, the gangs that I used to be associated with, they respected it. I never had not one issue. They respected it because I was so passionate. Not only just passionate, I was bringing men together. At 19, 20, 21, 23, 24 years old, I am bringing like men together, like, and having come. I think when I look back at it, I was just talking about it the other day. When I look back at it, I think I was the first in that during that period that had the courage to be vulnerable out loud. I think a lot of men who I encountered in there, they were trapped in that armor that I put on, and they couldn't get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, and the whole idea of vulnerability meant weakness. And what I had found through my journey was that vulnerability meant strength. Like, we had been tricked into believing that your being vulnerable was weak, but in essence, it was strength, because when I was being vulnerable about my situation, very transparent about everything, it was giving, it was medicine to these men. It was freeing to them, because I had the courage. That's not, I'm looking at it in hindsight. It was courage that I showed that made other people say, I can do that. That it's not bad, because I was sharing my whole journey with these men. These men became my brothers, and I was sharing and so when I saw on a micro level that a lot of brothers who were gang members who didn't deal with each other, they were connecting because of me, because
Mm-hmm.
everybody wanted to be in proximity to me, because here go a dude that they respected who came from at least from their perspective, and now he in here vulnerable and living like this. And not only that he's not being selfish, he is sharing the information that he gets. They used to see me. I used to be at the rec table with 8, 9 books, just reading studiously. I remember guys came in the day room one day, and they all grabbed me, because by this time everybody loved me. They all grabbed me and they pulled me away from the table. They say, "Look, you got to go out to rec, man. You gonna bust your brain. You were gonna bust your brain." That's how intense that I was just on learning, and I was sharing, and I didn't write home for money. I wrote home for books and magazines. That's all I wanted, was books and magazines. So I read probably over 1,400 books. while incarcerated, man. And and then I
Oh,
started teaching. So I started teaching, and it was crazy because anytime I would do a lecture, they would have to call for extra security because everybody would come off the wings, like all of the real bad guys, they would come off the wings just to hear what I had to say, and I would delivering it in a way that was uncompromising. Like I was really challenging men to be accountable and to be men and all this good stuff. And I was sharing that information, and I was sharing it in a way that they could relate to and they can understand. It was, I mean, guys would come around me, and if they curse, they'll be like, I'm sorry, man, my bad." They would apologize, and these were like dudes who were locked up for some heinous crimes, murder and stuff like that. I mean, real killers, and they would apologize me around me because I was just so on this journey to make sure that this situation is college for me, and that I come back out better than what I was when I came in, man. And
it's like you had a new type of armor of this, like, armor of an aura of
yes,
like learning and
man,
accountability and enlightenment and
man,
almost this
listen.
priest-like quality amongst some of these men. So it's kind of cool to see in that way.
When you got 15 men on a rec yard drinking coffee, discussing Plato and Socrates, and we having real discussions and all that good stuff. At the time, I didn't understand that, but like when I look back on it in hindsight, like that was pretty dope, because these men who were prior to me, they had this mindset, they had a different mindset, and now because of me and because I'm being empowered and I'm being a vessel, these men are having real conversations. They're reconnecting with their families. They're showing up different ways. I witnessed that out of my eyes, but I was just doing what I felt was right to do. And I was just doing that, right? And one day I was in the day room, and I wrapped this up. I was in the day room, and I had already brung Crips and Bloods together, Aryan Nation together. I stopped riots and all that good stuff just with my influence. I was on the, because I was never writing home telling my family what I was doing. They didn't know I went through this whole transformation because I really focused on figuring out myself so that I understood, you know, what I needed to do to be better, and that I accepted every aspect of me, the ugly, the good, bad, ugly, and indifferent, and I gained equanimity around all that stuff to be able to not allow it to control me or come back and wrap me. I really did that. And so I didn't write my family. And then one day I'm in a day room, and in prison, when the news come on in the day room, it's chaotic. Nobody wants to hear about the news. They don't care about none of that. It's loud. You would be up on the TV trying to listen. But if the stories on, like One Life to Live, General Hospital, those stories, if you make a sound while those on, that could cost you your life. That's how in tune these guys is to that stuff, which I could never
Oh,
figure out. I could never. These guys knew the actor's name. They knew what happened last week, and I could just never get that because they was sitting in the day room all day and watch stories, and I couldn't get that. I just made a mental note of it. But on this particular day, the news came on and it was quiet. It was quiet, and the whole time I had been in prison, it never been quiet when the news was on. Never. And so I made a mental note of that. And in the
hmm.
screen come this guy in my neighborhood, and he was talking about gang intervention and prevention, the work that I was
Hmm.
doing currently in prison. Like I was doing gang intervention work in prison,
Hmm.
bringing these gangs together and telling we men, not gang members. And this guy was on, he was talking, and then the next frame, not only was he on, he was in my neighborhood. That's what's really caught my attention. He was in my neighborhood that I came from. And then the next frame, he had two of my cousins talking to the news people. And
Wow.
I said, whoever this guy is, that he's that convincing to get them two on the news, I gotta know him because I know them two. They would never talk to the news. And and I wrote them a letter that night and said, man, whoever that guy you y'all was with, please introduce me to him. And I didn't know that they was telling him like, hey, you want to do something in this neighborhood, you got to get with our cousin. He just was incarcerated, but That's who you need to talk to. He's a smart one. Uh, Fortunately, probably about a year later, I was released, and I remember when I was getting released. Customary when you get released, men come by and bid their farewells to you, et cetera, et cetera. The day before I got released, these are grown men. They came to me and they said, "Look, so this prison ain't gonna be the same. Like what you done in here, it's not gonna be the same when you leave." And they said, "Man, when you get ready to leave, don't even come to our cell. Just go." And these dudes were, I mean, these were grown men. You gotta imagine, I'm 24 years old now, and these are grown men. Like to be my dad, and these
Yeah.
dudes crying crocodile tears because I'm being released, and it's not gonna be the same. At one point, they had me question, should I leave? I wanted to call the board and say, "Hey, man, let me stay a couple of couple of days," because these dudes were, because we had became family. These
Right.
dudes were, you got to understand me at 24, looking at these men who are crying because I'm gonna be released. That had never happened. These dudes are literally in tears, sad to the point they made me sad. They made me question, should
Mm.
I leave? Uh, and they was like, "Man, just go." But when I look back on it, it just speaks to the impact that I had on those men in that situation. And some men told me, they said, "Look, when you get out there," they said, "because you got a felon, you got an X on your back, it's gonna be hard in terms of jobs and apartments." They was telling me all of the things that's the
Mm.
challenges, and I remember looking at them saying, "Well, if the X is what get me out of opportunities, that take me out of opportunities, this X on my back," I said, "Well, then I'm gonna have to make the X on my back represent opportunity. I'm gonna change the dynamic, the connotation of the X." And I
Yeah.
left prison, man, and connected with Omar Jawar, who would be my free world mentor, man. And I never looked back. I never looked back. I went back into my neighborhood and started doing the work, started teaching men, started teaching young boys to be successful, to navigate the obstacle, not to yield to the influences that I yielded to create this whole model of mentors who step in as surrogates when fathers are not present. I wanted to be the person who says to the kid or to the man who is trying to figure out life, "Let me take your hand and let me walk you through this landmine. Let me show you
Mm-hmm.
how to get to the other side without blowing up." Because I know what it's like to blow up. I know what it's like to feel like you had no option. You had to do it. But I wanted to create something different. I wanted to talk to all the kids who live that duality of having to choose and sacrifice they amputate their personality to be what the neighborhood
Mm-hmm.
said they had to be. And so I became that. I spent the last 25 years of my life representing that effort various capacities, uh, just trying to get people to see it a different way. And I've become somewhat, and I don't like to think of it as an anomaly. I'm not an anomaly, but I've become some of an example for many men across this country in terms of redemption and transformation. But I really feel like redemption and transformation is real and it's afforded to anybody who tap into it. We just need more people who will have the courage to be vulnerable in public and understand that they medicine is not just for them, it's for somebody else. And what I mean by medicine, I'm saying whatever life struggles, whatever life trials and tribulation that's not meant to kill you. That's meant to be a lesson to teach somebody else who will eventually be in the same shoes as you. And you got to be able to say, if I made it, you can make it. If Anton can be successful, then you can be successful. It's nothing special about Anton. It's just that you got to tap into redemption and transformation and then activate on it.
Yeah, it sounds like you in that time were offering an alternative to these young men, and offering like those one-on-one relationships, those
Right.
mentorships, where rather than the void just getting filled by a gang affiliation by default, like you're kind of letting them like express their voice and telling them that it's okay to not put on the tough guy armor. In terms of like values, like how would you distill, the kind of one or two things that you think, are the most like the values and the like thing like teachings that kind of are the most effective in kind of
Yeah,
like changing people's course?
yeah. I think it's authenticity and allowing people to be who they are. That's key, and not that they're right or wrong, but allow them to be their authentic self. Because when people can be their authentic self, they can understand and identify when they hit rock bottom. Rock bottom is that place of authenticity, vulnerability and accountability that you need in order to build the life that you envision. A person that don't hit rock bottom, uh, they gonna keep living in these shadows. They're gonna keep living
Yeah.
in these facades, et cetera, because they hadn't hit rock bottom. But once a person hit rock bottom, the good thing about hitting rock bottom is because people look at rock bottom as a bad place, and I don't, because it was
Mm.
rock bottom that created what's sitting on this energy. Me
Mm-hmm.
feeling and understanding that I'm at rock bottom. Like I have a daughter that's 2 weeks old and I'm in prison. I grew up without a father. Put on this cape and this mask, this, all this good stuff. So I had to shed all that. I had to address that face to face and be honest with myself. That created the portal for me to climb up. See, at rock bottom, you can't go no further than rock bottom when you're at rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
There's nowhere else to go. You can't go lower. You can only go up. And that's authenticity, that's vulnerability, that's accountability, that's transparency, that's redemption, that's transformation. It's all of those things that's the gumbo to a person really self-actualizing and being a real productive good citizen. You know, and that can take on many forms, many shapes. But you gotta start from that point, right? And so for me, and then the many guys that I've seen that I've witnessed when I was incarcerated, I preached that to them, because if a person hadn't reached that point, most of your efforts would be futile to them or short lived. It's only when a person realizes they at that place that they can begin to rebuild and recreate and change, envision the life that they want to be.
Yeah, it's a real catalyst for personal change, and then that that mentorship and like having a path seems to be that's kind of the way that you can proceed through that. We've touched on like this idea of the what's happening in the community to like force you into things, and these kind of like systemic issues like systemic racism. Like what how do you kind of navigate those issues where maybe it's something that is a much harder to like crack through on the from when you're just on the interpersonal level of like, oh, there's this full like group dynamic, or it's like the whole neighborhood. You feel like it's like one person can start to make a change and then it's a snowball, or like how do you kind of approach that?
I do. It's kind of like what Stephen Covey talk about in Seven Habits of Highly Effective People when he says your circle of concern and your circle of influence. When you
Mm-hmm.
talk about systemic issues, stuff that's beyond your control, if you spend your time worrying about that, you can't self-actualize. You can't do what you do. But it's the inverse of that. It's really focusing on where you have influence at. Like I can be a better father. I may not can't I can't change global warming and all that, but I can be a better father. I can be a better
Mm-hmm.
citizen. I can be honest. I can learn to have integrity. I can learn to make my word be my word. Those type of things are the things that I would talk to people about because if like my approach to kids, young people, when I go into schools, I'm talking to kids, who may say, and I say this to them. I say, man, I don't care if your father in prison, your mom on drugs, your neighborhood is bad, you got a bunch of friends that don't like you, you come to school, your school ain't good, your teacher hates you, et cetera, et cetera. I tell them this. I said, it's like a boxing match. If you feel like that, you feel like the judge cheating, the cheerleader, the walk green girls on the other guy's side, and the crowd booing for the other person. I say, well, you got to knock him out. That's the only separation. You got to knock him out. If you so I tell people like you can tell me racism, this, that, all that. That don't mean nothing. At the end of the day, how do you, how you activate what it's going to take for you to get to the next level, for you to be a better person, and that falls in your circle of influence because you can
Mm-hmm.
work on you. It's not the 90% of the things that happen to you. It's the 10% of how you respond. It's that message that you give to people, and that's the
Yeah.
message I give. And it's an inspirational message. It's not a blaming message. It's not a condemning message. It's not none of
Yeah.
that.
It's a message of like accepting like personal power, really. It's
It's
like, hey,
personal.
there's all this stuff happening to me and that I can't control, but like, what's the one thing I can
It's
control?
There's somebody out there going through something worse than you, and they made it. If they made it, you can make it. That's what I tell people. Like it's
Hmm.
go to St. Jude. Go to St. Jude. There's kids who have 2 weeks to live, and you sit here complaining. You got all your limbs. You know what I'm saying? So those are the type of the messages that I'm known for. That I tell people because I don't allow people to have excuses in terms of what it takes. We all can have an excuse. We all can use an excuse. I don't allow that. I say find a way. It's a way that you just got to tap into it. You got to tap into it. And you got to accept accountability and responsibility, but just tap into it because if you tap into it, if consistency is tied to success. Something that you continue to do, continue to do, continue. It may not happen today. It may not happen tomorrow. It may not even happen next week or next month. But if you stay at it, you stay plugging at it, you plant the harvest in one season, and you get the when you plant the seed in one season, you get the harvest in the next season. That's just life.
Right.
Life has showed us that none come right here, right day, instant gratification. What we've been taught is you plant the seed in this season, and then in the next season you reap the harvest, and that's just life. And that's what I tell people. And you would think like something like that. As cliche or as simple as it sounds, but it has a big kick when people get it. When people understand that, it makes you stop being when you start looking around and seeing other stuff through the right lenses. It makes you stop being impressed by stuff that don't matter. It makes you put life into focus. It makes you say because we can feel like life is like this, but life is like this. Life is it's out there, and you can have the algorithms can make you think like it's just you, and that it's all about you, and that's how the algorithms are made to do that. They're gonna feed you
Yeah.
whatever you click on. That's what it's gonna
Hmm.
feed you, and that has a tendency to make you think this all the world is about, but it's
Yeah.
not. You got to break the algorithm.
Yeah, it sounds like leading with empathy is like a real value that your organization and everyone that works and collaborates shares. That's also a big theme of my show, and something that I'm passionate about is curiosity and empathy, and I really do think it's a profound value to affect change. On that note, like what are some misconceptions you might think that you want to address of someone that is like incarcerated or someone that's getting involved in gang activity? I mean, is there kind of a
It's convenient to judge people based upon their record, based upon
yeah.
something they've done. To take a little bit more approach when you look to understand why a person does what they do. It's kind of like when we're in the schools, we have a kid that come in, the teacher scorns him and sends him to suspension because he goes to sleep when he gets to school. And then you have somebody like our organization who goes to that kid house and learns that this kid mother is not in the home, and this kid has been up all night searching for his mom, and et cetera, et cetera. When he comes to school, he's asleep. If you don't have that proximity, uh, and I call it proximity understanding, that's going way beyond surface understanding, making a quick judgment of people, places, and things. You don't have that proximity or the will to have proximity understanding. you'll misdiagnose, misjudge, misheard a whole bunch of people. You know what I'm saying? Because it's easy, it's more convenient to just make a judgment. Uh,
Right. You would be like that judge saying you're a menace to society without
Absolutely.
understanding all of the, factors that have gone into
Yeah,
that moment.
yeah. So I tell people all the time, like you have to really, to be effective, you have to really have proximity to what it is you're trying to solve. Have all the answers. You know, it's you cannot make a uh, you cannot make a smart judgment or assumption if you ain't got all the information. A lot of times we make assumptions as people without the information because it's convenient and it fits whatever narrative that we have in our mind. I always challenge people to go beyond that. And when you start doing that, and I got a framework called redemptive activism that I created, and it basically just says that any and everybody, place, or thing is afforded redemption for whatever mistake they made. Everybody, we are not capable, or we don't have the power to say who can be redeemed. We don't have that. And if we begin that, then all of the rhetoric about change and ways to change wouldn't be condemnatory. It'll be cooperative because we begin understanding that I may have made a mistake, but that's not the sum total of who I am. We all can make mistakes, and a lot of times in this narrative, in this culture, you make one bad soundbite can end your career. You know, like I can't have a bad day, I can't slip. You know, and that's dangerous for us just as a country when we're dogged by those type of ideologies that says if I agree with you, I agree with everything you say. If I disagree with you, then I disagree with your whole being. That's the state that we're in right now. That we got to continuously fight to not be in that space. We got to continue to fight for proximity, understanding, and redemptive activism, and all that good stuff. Because ultimately, that's going to make us a better country. You
Hmm.
know, and again, it's easy to make a judgment because of the algorithm. The algorithm
Sure.
that feeds you what you click on. If I click
It's
on
just,
something about ice cream or see ice cream all day on my down my feed, that's the
yeah,
danger.
you're just
And the
going to get
danger of that, yeah,
deeper into whatever trench you're kind of thinking and feeling. Yeah. Yeah.
and the danger of that is no one never examined what that does to the individual who are getting that information. How does it affect them? I do police trainings, community police trainings all the time, and I tell them that I said, if you're an officer, if you watch a video, click on a video of a unarmed, a black male, a armed black person shooting a police officer, it's gonna
Hmm.
feed every instance like that across the country, and it's never gonna stop. Or if you a unarmed guy getting shot by a police officer, it's gonna feed you that, and it's never gonna stop. But it makes the confrontation, it makes the interaction aggressive, hyper focused when we meet, because nobody never stops to say it's the algorithms that are driving us.
Yeah. Right. You're already primed
Right?
to be
Exactly.
trigger happy.
Yes. And
Yeah.
so
Wow.
and so we have to fight against those algorithms so that we become more connected, more back in community, and not afraid because of the algorithm, how they treat us, man.
I mean, it seems like a really interesting and big challenge to like create those bridges between law enforcement and your communities. What have you found is the most like positive mechanism? I mean, it seems
Proximity,
what
proximity, proximity.
proximity.
Yeah,
Mm.
you bring people together. It's hard to reduce a person to an avatar if you bring them together. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
it's easy to sit comfortably in our own homes and watch the news and develop a narrative and a connotation with certain stuff. But when you bring people, see what's missing, and I know I'm going, but what's missing is the human touch. I think we don't forgot how important the human touch is because technology has took that from us, and so the human touch on when we don't have the human touch, we are controlled by the algorithm. All of us are, and we never stop to think about the impact and effect that those algorithms and what we constantly feed into our subconscious has on us. Nobody says, let me examine what what the effect of this is. Because why would they? But I've learned and I've watched and I've noticed that when you bring people together in a space where they can be honest, authentic,
Mm.
it opens the door for real connection, uh, creativity, and people. And it's hard to shoot somebody if you have a relationship with that person. It's
Yeah.
hard to
Huh.
misunderstand that person if you have a relationship with that person that's a real human touch relationship versus the algorithm. So so it's been helpful. I mean, it's interesting when you bring these two communities together and that had never been together and you facilitate teleportation, how they walk out of there locked on. It
Mm.
never fails. Every time I do it, it never fails. I got one of the highest rated police trainings, in the city because
Wow.
people come in and it's dressing implicit bias because they come in with all this stuff in their head and all this. And me, I'm so clever. My picture is gonna always be on a projector in a white prison suit, and so you got to
Mm.
imagine all these officers coming in to the trainer who been to prison. What that does to
Mm.
their algorithm, and
Mm.
so because my intent is to trigger all of the biases that they have,
Yeah.
and by the end of the session, they're gone. They've been dissipated.
Right. Right.
And so,
You're intentionally like bringing forth the implicit biases in the priors, and then like having that interpersonal connection, which then can like diffuse it and flip it on its head. Yeah, that's very smart.
yeah, I do that every time. So this is part of the work that I do. But all this work, so that I ground this, all this work came from that one day standing in the court, that 2 weeks prior having my daughter, feeling like I was at rock bottom, that I crossed out, that I struck out on life. That was a rock bottom moment for me. That inspired me to say I can't go nowhere but up. And so it just made me start questioning a lot of stuff that we normally accept as human beings, as people, as Americans. We just accept this stuff, and nobody never questioned it. And so I just went on this whole journey of just questioning this stuff and trying to bring that human at the bottom of all the work that we do. It's really about human. It's really about people. It's really about loving people and not being divided and all that good stuff. That's at the core of my
Yeah,
work.
yeah. I mean that you have a very inspiring story, and it seems like this work is very meaningful and impactful. I have one final question that we ask all our guests is what would you say to your younger self? That 19-year-old in the courtroom. Like what would you say to yourself?
19-year old, I would say it's gonna be okay because you couldn't have told me it was gonna be okay that day I was in the courtroom. I really felt overwhelmed. I had anxiety because I had fear. I mean, I was. Now imagine this: I'm being labeled a menace to society, and just understand the implications of those words. What that means.
Yeah, yeah.
You would think that's
That's
the worst person ever.
seems hard to recover
Yeah,
from,
yeah. Can't
to say
recover.
the least.
And, that, and check this out, Dad. Why those words? When those words were being said to me, and I was subsequently sentenced to prison, I was scared shitless of going to prison. I want you to think about that for a second. Menace to society, in my mind, is somebody who don't fear nothing, who is feared, who is all that. But the two emotions that I felt in that moment was fear. That's what I felt in that moment. So I'm saying that to say it doesn't match up with menace to society. Because a menace to society would be expected to go to prison and want to go to prison and don't have no problem with prison. But for me to be in that moment very fearful, if I could be transparently honest with you, I was fearful because that was the unknown. I didn't know what was going to happen. I heard all these stories. I was shaking in my boots, being led back to the holdover cell, labeled a menace to society. It just don't match up. And I thought, and when I looked at that in hindsight, I said that was indicative that I wasn't a menace to society. I was just a misjudged kid. I was just somebody was looking at me through the wrong lenses. And I think, unfortunately, that happens for a lot of kids in our society. Uh, not just in that arena. I think it happens
Yeah.
all too often where people judge, quick judge, looking through the wrong lenses because of
It
the
it sounds like the first step is like having that empathy for yourself.
yes, yes, exactly. So yeah, man, that's how it happened. That's
Yeah.
exactly how it happened.
Well, Antong Lucky, thank you so much for the conversation.
Man, I appreciate this conversation, and if we got to do it again, I'm good because I enjoyed this myself.
Yeah, same, same. Wishing you all the best in your future work and
Yeah.
um, all the change and transformation that you're affecting.
Yes, and make sure they go pick up that redemptive path forward from incarceration to a life of activism. And then I'm working on my second book that's gonna come out at the top of end of this year. It's called Leading the Fatherless to Faith. So be on the lookout for that. Leading the
All
Fatherless to
right.
Faith. Yeah, it's gonna be a good one.
Sound sounds powerful. Everyone, you can check out A Redemptive Path Forward: My Life from Incarceration to a Life of Activism anywhere books are sold.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, for more on Antong's story. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.